Welcome to Solve for Yes, how to erect a scaffolding of practical supports around a person-centered model of care. I'm your presenter, J. Alexander Douglas. This presentation was originally developed as my New Mexico LEND Fellowship capstone project for the 2020 to 2021 year. It's further been developed and refined throughout the work that I've been doing with Melisa Santacroce and her team. A little bit about what LEND is. LEND is a program through the Center for Development and Disability with UNM. LEND stands for the Leadership, Education, and Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities Interdisciplinary Traineeship. It's a multidisciplinary program that puts mostly medical students together with self-advocates who have neurodevelopmental disabilities, including autism, along with their family members. So I'm going to go ahead and pause just a moment here. I'm not going to go over all the competencies that we cover, and this was actually something specific for that LEND program. Okay, introduction. An email to Melisa Santacroce, BCBA, SLP. This was a letter that I wrote when I was at one of my lowest lows during the pandemic, when all of my support system had basically been pulled out from under me. Greetings, Melisa. My name is J. Alexander Douglas, and I am an autistic adult who is struggling to survive in a society which offers me little respite from my own special needs and little room to relax into my true self. I often feel trapped in my own home performing inane and repetitive activities of daily living, ADLs, which, while necessary, are so all-consuming of my time and energy that I must make sacrifices to remain productive toward my career goals. Nothing I've tried to date has been effective. And some of those sacrifices included letting go of my self-care, dysregulating, ignoring peripheral responsibilities, and losing sleep by staying out past midnight, just getting, regular adulting things done. You may be wondering, what does Solve for Yes actually mean? Well, Solve for Yes was born about with my discontent for the medical model of disability that treats disability like a problem, specifically a math problem, as something to be solved. The medical model of disability seeks out a solution to fix the issue and asks you to solve for X. So I have a little equation there, P, that stands for person with a disability, minus whatever it is that they struggle with doing or have a limited capacity for doing, is what equates their disability status. And my approach says, no, that's not right. This is not correct. And instead uses the SOS strategy, or the Scaffolding of Supports strategy, to lift up the individual from below and empower them to say yes in more situations and to a wider variety of activities. So, case study. It's me. I'm the case study. And my story, my autism was misdiagnosed for 31 years as a string of behavioral health disorders. I faced numerous barriers to living alone regarding personal effectiveness, and I've been completely unsuccessful living with roommates due to said barriers. In 2013, I tried moving back in with family. This was equally unsuccessful, and as a result, in 2014, I experienced homelessness. Now, I will pause here for a second and just let you know, it wasn't the type of homelessness where I was sleeping on the street. I was extremely fortunate that I had a close personal friend who allowed me to couch crash for a couple of months. But just like the image there says, it's not a sleepover if you can't go home. With some help, I recovered from that status and I'm no longer unhoused. But where am I now? And how am I doing? Well, the answer is it could be better. I live in subsidized housing, otherwise known as HUD housing. In prior years, I lived with the very low income waiver. The no/very low income waiver reduces renter obligation to as little as $2 a month. I no longer qualify for that, but I still pay the minimum income adjusted rent of $25 per month. I have SNAP, which was formerly the food stamp program, which offers me a monthly grocery credit. So that's basically how I'm able to eat. In 2019, my federal adjusted gross income was $1,263. That is for the year. So I was not living on $1,200 a month, but $1,200 the entire year. And that is before government subsidy and financial assistance. Now, 2020 threw a curveball for everyone. And so it's kind of a little bit of a blip in my tracking of income year to year. I qualified for PUA, which is Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. And that PUA covered not only my income for the year, but it actually exceeded 3 of my prior year's earnings combined. So I was able to live pretty well off of that for the year of 2020. In 2021, I was back to earning my own income again, and my adjusted income came up to $3,096. So I was doing a little bit better in 2021. But I'm doing this how? How does a person live off of $3,000 a year? ASPE 2021 poverty guidelines suggest that for 2 persons, that's myself and my son, the poverty level, the federal poverty level, or FPL, is set at $17,420. My earnings of $3,096 equates 17.772% of FPL. This roughly translates to the fact that I could work 5.6 times as hard and as often as I do now and still be poor. So just take that in for a moment. Poverty is the symptom of ineffectiveness. When this is true, there is plenty of work available. And if you look in the chat, there's going to be a link posted for a resource. There's actually a place called the Neurodiversity Career Connector that is a consortium of about 50 different employers who are all specifically targeting neurodivergent individuals that they wish to hire. So there is work that I could be applying for. I hold a diverse skill set, I'm experienced, and I'm motivated. But when that's true, why does this still happen? I'm quickly fired or asked to resign, often citing cost effectiveness for the company or being a poor match to the position or the company culture. I don't do so great at water cooler talk. I don't play the social politics well of the corporate world. And additionally, I find that I must withdraw from roughly about 50% of my freelance contracts because my contribution falls short of the expected output. As a matter of fact, according to a 2017 Drexel University study, only 14% of working age adults with autism have a paid job in the community. So think about that. Right now, there are over 80% of individuals with autism who are either unemployed or underemployed. Now, where did this start? Misdiagnosis in childhood of multiple behavioral health disorders. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder at age 17, generalized anxiety disorder also at age 17. I was listed as twice exceptional, which is just a fancy way of saying that I was both, on one hand, gifted, but on the other hand, I had, at the time, unspecified learning disability. They weren't really thinking of it through the lens of autism at the time. They were thinking of it just as I had difficulty in some areas of study. And that was diagnosed at age 16. I was listed on my IEP as seriously emotionally, behaviorally disturbed starting at age 6. So I've been in and out of behavioral health counseling since grade 2. Imagine telling your 6-year-old child that they are quote unquote disturbed because of emotional outbursts that ultimately turned out to be neurological meltdowns, or what's more commonly known as autistic meltdowns. I vividly recall being at a conference table as a child and having the adults at the table turn to me and effectively tell me that I was a disturbed individual. And that's something that I've had to carry with me through into adulthood. So they put me in talk therapy, but the problem is that talk therapy is not enough. It does provide some benefit, such as an opportunity for emotional processing. It provides some validation. It can provide certain coping strategies and a place of safety where you can just be yourself. But the fact is that more is needed. I've determined through many years of self-reflection that I require a person-centered model of care, as well as practical functional tools and supports. So that's part of what I'm hoping to offer to everyone here today. Now, is life skills training a solution? There's starting to be some programs available through more states now that offer something called life skills training. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically they take an individual and they teach you how to do basic functions of everyday living, what we generally speak of as adulting. So they teach you how to wash and fold laundry. They teach you how to cook a meal, including a couple of different ways of making eggs. They teach you how to maintain your personal hygiene. But the reality of the situation is that while it's true that it was important for me in childhood and adolescence to be distinctly taught how to do each of those things, because I failed to intuit many of those skills on my own or pick them up through quote unquote osmosis like my peers. By early to mid adulthood, my life skills comprehension had reached a plateau. So life skills training is also not enough. I know how to do laundry, but how do I finish it in less than 9 hours? I know how to cook a meal, but how do I keep breakfast prep from stretching past lunch? I know how to maintain personal hygiene, but how do I squeeze it in before midnight? Problem framing. I've identified 3 major areas of struggle. So let's break down the actual problem. My areas of struggle include neurosocial communication patterns, which is what I say and how I say it, executive functioning differences, how quickly and how well I organize information inside my head, as well as sensory processing and sensory integration concerns. That's tolerance for external as well as internal stimuli. And at the root of all 3 is hyper-awareness. So let's reframe ASD deficits for a moment. You often hear autism referred to as including social deficits or executive functioning deficit. But calling them deficits infers a reduced capacity or an impaired function. My observations suggest exactly the opposite. I am both a highly sensitive person as well as highly self-aware as well as highly hyper-aware of my environment. So my threshold for the tolerance of that information actually seems comparatively high when in relation to all that I'm taking in at a specific time. Hyper-awareness adds detail and depth, but it can steal momentum and breadth. So I often say that my mind works like a freight train. It doesn't stop on a dime. It takes me a while to work up the momentum to get going whenever I'm switching tasks, for example. And it's kind of like if you imagine that freight train chugging up a hill, right? It takes quite a lot of effort as well as time for me to get going on a task. But once I'm deep within that task, I can hit the brakes on it, but it's going to be another mile down the track before I actually come to a crawl. So really take that in for a moment. Hyper-awareness adds detail and depth, but it can steal momentum and breadth. Let's talk a little bit about the autism stress bucket model. Now, you might have encountered something called the stress bucket. It's been around on paper since 2002. It comes from Bravitt and Turkington, who actually created this model. I've adapted it specifically to the lens of autism. So basically what it's saying is that there is this bucket and everyone has one. And you've probably heard that there are different types of stress. You may have heard the term eustress or distress for effectively like the positive kinds of stress, like excitement for something that's coming up, or stress over bills or finances as eustress or distress. But regardless of the type of stress, it accumulates into this bucket and it starts to slowly fill up over time. And what causes that to fill up for the autistic individual can be a number of different things. It can come from your sensory inputs. It can come, so that would be like things in your environment like lights and sounds and smells. It can come from your memory and cognition. So trying to remember where I set my keys, or trying to figure out what the best strategy is going to be in order to get my taxes paid on time. It can include executive functioning tasks, which would be like, for example, whenever there is a sequential list where I'm trying to list things in order, or if I'm trying to keep track of where I am in a process. It can come from anxiety and impulsivity. So anxiety would be, like stressing out over the fact that I am in a room that feels very uncomfortable to me because there's a lot of light and sound and a lot of commotion from a bunch of people jostling together. Impulsivity would be the impulse to run out of that room and get away from that situation. But trying to resist that urge actually takes effort and causes internal stress to accumulate. It can be things like hunger and nutrition. I think everybody here has likely encountered the situation where you've been hangry once or twice. But for me, I have to really carefully monitor my nutrition level, because my internal sense that I am starting to get hungry can get really loud, and it can be very distracting from whatever it is that I'm trying to do. Some people who are on the spectrum have completely the opposite problem, where their hunger alarm doesn't seem to go off at all, and they have to exert actual effort, and it causes a level of stress to accumulate remembering to eat on time or remembering to do things when it's time to do them. So all of that starts to fill up your bucket. And what happens when your bucket overflows? Well, that's when we start to see outward signs such as autistic meltdown or neurological meltdown. It might cause a panic attack. It may cause internal repercussions such as sensory intolerance. You can be not only become intolerant to the type of sensory input that's causing the problem, such as that bright light or that loud sound, but it can actually make it so that you're intolerant to all of the various senses and all of the various inputs that are coming in. So it may be a bright light that set you off, but now you are barely able to tolerate any individuals in the room speaking above a whisper. It can cause an individual to go nonverbal. So we call that intermittent aphasia. I have that occur occasionally. It really has to build up a lot in my stress bucket before I have that particular type of symptom, but it does happen to me occasionally. Another effect that I find when my stress bucket overflows is delayed cognition. I can either experience a delayed time sense where it feels like my body is moving in slow motion, but everybody else around me is moving in real time. Or it can be delayed cognition where it's sort of similar to the intermittent aphasia, where I go slightly nonverbal, but it just takes extra time to get words out. There's also something called exertional malaise, where anything that takes effort becomes extremely tiring. So you can actually have a form of fatigue that you experience, or you can just feel crummy, almost like you're getting sick. And that type of exertion, it could be physical from like actual getting up and physically exercising your body, or it can be from mental exertion. So if I have to think really hard about something that I need to do, then I will oftentimes feel a sort of backlash afterwards. In fact, after this presentation, I can pretty much guarantee you that I'm going to be experiencing that exertional malaise just from coming up here and talking to you guys for 90 minutes. And brain fog. Brain fog is when it's kind of like actually being in a vehicle and driving through fog. You can only see so far ahead of you. And so when I experience brain fog, one of the things that happens is like, I like to use the example of brushing my teeth. So brushing your teeth is something that is pretty much ingrained in muscle memory, and you don't have to think very hard about doing it. But when I'm experiencing brain fog, I have to actually think of every individual step involved. So I've got to think, okay, it's time to twist the cap off the toothpaste. Now I've got the toothpaste in my hand. I need to squeeze the toothpaste tube and put it on the toothbrush. Each of those steps, I'm unable to think several steps ahead. And so I have to actually put effort into each individual step of the process. So these are all things that can happen when the stress bucket overflows. Now, there are coping skills that you can learn that can help to reduce the amount of stress that is filling up your stress bucket. And that's shown in the model as a tap at the bottom of the bucket. So that's this down here. And those coping skills, you can have great coping skills, or you can have not so great coping skills. You can have effective coping skills, or you can have ineffective coping skills. Laura in the chat suggests stimming, and yes, stimming or sensory stimulation of a pleasant variety can be relaxing and can help to reduce the level of stress that's filling up your bucket. And yes, it is a form of self-soothing, and there are other types of self-soothing. You can also have things like, I use daily meditation is one of the ways that I empty out my stress bucket. I use mindfulness exercises. Sometimes I do a breathing exercise where I put my hands crossed over my head, and I do deep breathing for a few seconds to a few minutes. And that helps to relieve stress. So in the model, this is either shown as a wide tap that's draining out the bucket rapidly, or a narrow tap that drains the bucket slower. And respectively, that means that the stress is either reduced, or it continues to fill up, but it doesn't fill up quite as fast. You can also have negative stress relievers or negative coping skills that are actually harmful. So things like addiction to alcohol or drugs can be a stress reliever, but they're not necessarily going to help you in the long run. Also, there can be ineffective habits that may help but have some negative repercussions, like biting your fingernails. And so those are all coping skills, but they have positive or negative effects respectively. Now, The one part of the Brabant and Turkington stress bucket model that I challenge is that vulnerability is typically shown by the size of the bucket. And so in a lot of interpretations of this model, when they're talking about autism, you will see that a neuronormative individual will have a large bucket, and the autism patient or autistic individual will have a very small bucket, saying that they have less tolerance for stress. But going back to what we said about the in the previous slide, when we were talking about reframing those deficits, I challenge that the bucket does not necessarily have a respective size based on the individual's vulnerability. So before I move on to the next slide, I do want to direct your attention to, in the chat, Kiara is going to place a link that will take you to a worksheet that you can do where you can actually figure out your own stress bucket and what some of your stressors are, what overflow looks like, as well as what some of the coping skills that you use to help that bucket drain out might be. Okay, so I want to pose a question. Which fills faster? Going back to that model of autism being shown as the small bucket. If I have a garden hose that's filling the bucket at 40 liters per minute, and I have a relatively small bucket, and then I have a larger bucket that's being filled by a fire hose at 1,000 liters per minute. Are there any mathematicians in the room who can quickly answer how many times bigger that bucket B would need to be in order for these buckets to fill at the same rate? Place your answers in the chat. Anybody? Well, the answer is, it doesn't seem like I've got any activity here. The answer is 25 times. You'd have to have 25 times bigger bucket in bucket B to equal the same rate as bucket A. So you can see from this model that the problem isn't that autistic individuals have a smaller bucket. The problem is that we're drinking from the fire hose. All of those sensory inputs accumulate so quickly that we would have to have 25 times larger a bucket, according to this model, or according to this analogy, in order for those to have the same apparent stress tolerance as a neuronormative individual. So my argument is that even if you have twice the size of an average person's bucket or 4 times the size, it's still not going to cut it. Now, as another visual illustration of what it's like to be on the spectrum, I want to pull from the 1999 movie, The Matrix. In The Matrix, the main character, Neo, reaches a certain point where he gains something called the sight. Towards the end of the movie, you see this shot of Neo staring down a hallway. But that hallway doesn't appear as the simulation, the computer simulation, like what is intended to have seen. He instead sees we see Neo's point of view down a hallway where objects and adversaries are revealed as long strings of computer code. So he's basically able to see the source code of his world. Now, the lens of autism doesn't just offer, but it demands hyper-awareness of details others often miss. While viewing the world through its source code, one must learn to filter out extraneous sensory data for ease of navigation and communication. Who here can look at this teapot in the corner here and read that source code and tell me what color that teapot is? Anybody? Or what about this clock? Can anybody tell me what time is displayed on that dial? If you look closely, you can probably just make out where the hands are pointing. But the point is that you have to see around all of this extraneous data in order to get the information that you're looking for. And that's a little bit of an example of what it's like to live with all of this background noise and chatter that we're picking up at any given time. So in summary, with our case summary, the big takeaways here are: one, poverty is the symptom of ineffectiveness. Also, that talk therapy is not enough. Life skills training is not enough. There are three major areas of struggle, including neurosocial communication patterns, executive functioning differences, sensory processing and sensory integration issues. Bucket overflow does not equal small bucket size. And hyper awareness means drinking from the fire hose, noticing what others miss, and being forced to filter out the source code of life. Which leads me to my research. So I'm going to start by pulling from some early examples from my early life. I was a fan of reading screenplays and stage plays when I was younger. And I was particularly impressed by a quote from Oscar Wilde that says, "To expect the unexpected shows a thoroughly modern intellect." We normally shorten that down to just simply expect the unexpected. But in this presentation, I intend to apply a modern intellect to trying to solve this problem of managing my daily living. I was also in middle school, I joined Boy Scouts, and I was taught there to be prepared. My 1990 Boy Scout handbook phrases it well when it says, "A scout prepares for whatever comes his way by learning all he can. He keeps himself strong, healthy, and ready to meet challenges of life." So already I was kind of primed for this idea of expect the unexpected and figure out how to be prepared for basically anything that life throws at me. A little later in life, I had the advantage of being invited into a dialectical behavioral therapy skills training, or DBT skills training, in which I was taught, if you can't solve a big problem right now, solve smaller problems. Sometimes taking care of smaller problems gives us a sense that we are doing something as opposed to being passive or helpless. And that same DBT skills training included some text from Marsha Linehan, who was a pioneer of the DBT practice. And she had a lot to say on coping ahead of time toward difficult situations. Now, I'm not going to read every word on this page for you. I'll let you do that yourself. But going over some of the highlights, the general process is the first thing that you do is describe a situation that is likely to create a sensory emergency. Decide which coping or problem-solving skills you'll use. Imagine the situation as vividly as possible. Rehearse coping effectively with the situation. In fact, Linehan reinforces this 4 times. She says, rehearse, 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 rehearse. And practice relaxation after rehearsing, because especially for sensitive individuals, it can be just as stressful or almost as stressful as actually encountering the situation in real life to simply imagine this happening in your head. So thinking of all this, be prepared and be ready for anything that life throws at you. I started to think about the process of keeping a first aid kit. Many of us have encountered first aid kits in our general life. You may keep one in your medicine cabinet, or you might have one hanging from the wall at work. But the American Red Cross suggests that having a well-stocked first aid kit and being trained in how to use it helps you stay calm in emergencies because you know what to do and where to get the tools you need. It allows you to keep an injured person safe from further harm and as comfortable as possible until medical care can arrive. So just thinking about that, I started to wonder if we have a first aid kit for regular emergencies or like bodily emergencies, why don't we have first aid kits for other types of things? And of course, I can think of a few examples. You might have a specific boating kit for boating safety when you go out on the lake. You might carry a roadside emergency kit that has specialized tools like LED flashers or those little reflective triangles that you can set by the road to warn people that you're pulled over. But why don't we have a sensory emergency kit for sensory emergencies that might arise? And that's when I stumbled upon an inspired idea. I was reading a book called Life and Love, Positive Strategies for Autistic Adults by Zosia Zaks. And in that, Zosia Zaks talks about sensory emergency kits, or what I like to call SEm-Kits for short. Zosia says, everywhere I go, I carry a SEm-Kit. This kit contains the items I need to handle a sensory emergency should one arise. Everyone's SEm-Kit will be different. Think about your senses, what bothers you, and how you could cope. You may think of other items not listed in this presentation to add, or you may not need some of these. The important point is to make sure you create your kit and then take it with you everywhere you go. And I'm going to stop my share just briefly and show you guys what my SEm-Kit looks like. It's got a little tag in the front that tells everybody that I'm carrying medical equipment with me. So I like to actually be very visible and let people know this is my kit. It's for medical reasons. And it helps with going to the grocery store or in places. I spend a lot of time on film sets where they may not otherwise encourage you to carry a bag around with you. But having it marked as medical equipment helps with just letting people know, hey, this is for medical reasons. It's kind of the same general idea as having a vest on your pet if you are bringing a support animal with you when you go places. So let's go back to the slideshow here. Right now, I'm going to put a pin in the SEm-Kit thing, and I will circle back around to that a little later to talk a bit about how to actually put one together. But let's talk a little bit now about the SOS strategy and how specifically to erect a scaffolding of supports. So the steps are: take a needs inventory, use technology as tools for automation, assemble your team, craft your CareCircle, map your coverage, delegate tasks, visualize priorities, and stabilize your resources. So I apologize for this big, loud, obnoxious image that's up on the screen right now. I will explain exactly what it's for and why it's so flagrantly colorful. But taking a needs inventory, so what I started with was this up here in the corner, where it's, I basically just took a dry erase board and I attempted to write down every area of need that I possibly had, everything that I was struggling with on a daily basis. And I came up with identifying 45 areas of need. Now, 34 of those were recurring needs, or what I like to refer to as scheduled maintenance. And 11 of those were transitory needs, or what I call one-shots. Those are one and done. And so once you've actually checked that off your list, it stays off your list. Whereas with the scheduled maintenance, it's a recurring need. It's something that once you do, you have to do it again. And so that would be, just as an example, something like washing the dishes. You're just going to dirty more dishes afterwards, or washing laundry. You're just going to have to do more laundry again when things get dirty. So after making this list, I organized everything by how frequently each item needed to do. And that's how we're getting to the loud, obnoxious image over here. This is actually an Excel spreadsheet where I took each of those recurring needs and I placed them out according to intervals. And so there are some things that you do frequently, like the dishes or the laundry that I mentioned, that has to be done once a day or once a week. And there are other items that need to be taken care of less often. So if your car, for example, your car insurance is on a 6-month policy, then you may only pay that twice a year, or you may pay taxes only once a year, or if you have a business, maybe it's quarterly. But you have items that are done less frequently, and then you have other items that are done more frequently. And every time you see an alternation of color going from, purple or blue or red, like light to dark, then you're seeing an occurrence of another interval. And when I added all of those together, I determined that I had 1,395 annual intervals of total needs that needed to be met per year. And so going back to that whole like filtering the source code of life thing, it's no wonder that when somebody would ask me a simple question like, how can I help or what needs doing, I stumbled on providing an answer, because in my head was buzzing around all these, 1,000, almost 1,400 different things that needed to be done. And I had to individually assess, has that thing been done recently? Does it need to be done again? And so my conclusion is that it really requires a long-term support strategy, and it must be both comprehensive and robust. Let's talk a little bit about how to reframe convenience items as tools for healthy living. So I was elated to actually receive a Roomba as a gift from a friend of mine. And I can't tell you that this completely changed my life. For the longest time, I thought a Roomba was just a fancy thing that people with lots of money got as a convenience item. But once I actually had it in my home, I started to realize just how important it was for my daily living. So rather than have to actually think about how often my floors got cleaned, and specifically determine once I decided to sweep my floors or vacuum, what specific room I was going to start in and which angle I was going to angle the broom or the vacuum at, and to try and get the most clean out of the shortest span of time. Now I have an item that it belongs in my home, and I've got this robot vacuum that just does it for me. And the only thing that I have to remember is to empty it out once a week. And so suddenly it frees up all of this mental energy and time that I can spend toward other activities. As another example, I have something called an EliGrid, which is an electronic pill case that it has to be programmed by a smartphone. And once you input all of the medications that you take, how frequently you take them, and how many of each pill you're taking per dose, then the pill case remembers when it's time, and it will chime an alarm. And it will also light up with LEDs to tell you which bay you're taking your medication from and how many you're taking at that specific dosage. So this is another thing that was just revolutionary in my life, and it completely changed my medication adherence. What's great is that it also does smartphone tracking. So it'll tell you how closely you are following your adherence, whether you're at 95% or 80% or lower of how frequently you take your medication versus skipping a dose, which can be valuable information for your medical team. So the main thing, the big takeaway with this is not specifically like go get a Roomba or specifically go get an EliGrid, although those are excellent things that I hope that everyone has access to. I know not everybody will, but it's more applying the concepts to start thinking about technology as tools for healthier living, rather than merely as convenience items that are great to have. I can give you another example of, I recently bought a dishwasher. My apartment did not come with a dishwasher. And this dishwasher is extra small because my apartment is not large enough to actually fit a full-size dishwasher. So I have a countertop dishwasher that's a little bit larger than a microwave. It's about 1 square foot of internal space. which is only enough to do about 5 or 6 plates and bowls at a time. And it's not big enough to wash any of my pots or pans. But the amazing thing about having this is that I can now set my dishwasher to run. And I can sit alongside it and I can scrub my pots and pans and get my dishes done in half the time. So this is really more about shifting your mindset to these little life hacks or time savers, using technology that's available to you, whatever you can find, to automate as many processes as you can in your life to try and overcome that backlog that you're going to inevitably suffer based on the fact that you are basically thinking 4 times as hard as the average person because you have to filter out so much information around you in the world. Let's talk a little bit about assembling your team. The main thing is do your research on what's available as far as services that are available in your area, and apply for as many services as you can. Actually make sure that you are asking for specifically the help that you need. It may or may not be available in the area where you live, but the main thing is that you have to actively recruit supports for your medical needs, your community needs, your family needs, as well as your household needs. The main takeaway from this is just teams come, some assembly required. So they're not going to just come to you on their own. You have to actually go out there and actively recruit people to try and help you with the things that you need help with. Okay, so before I get into this next bit, I will, just a caveat, this is a little bit controversial. I'm talking about services that happen to work for me. This is not going to be for everyone, so your mileage may vary. But I want to talk a little bit about the ABA services that I applied for during that letter that I wrote to Melisa Santacroce right at the beginning of this presentation. She's actually an ABA specialist, and ABA is something that has gotten a really bad rap straight from its conception. And it's something that's actually done a lot of people a lot of harm. But ABA is applied behavior analysis. And it's important to understand that there is this sort of new wave of ABA services that is starting to become available. And I really thought that one of my constituents in the ABA world, Nathan Dennis, said it best when he paraphrased a paper that was written by Greg Handley called A Perspective on Today's ABA. He says that the new wave of ABA starts with compassion over procedure. He says that he won't try to change a behavior before learning directly from a recipient and actively listening in for their needs. What sets us apart from our predecessors is that in today's practice, assent, compassion, and learning comes first. So the main thing that Nathan Dennis is trying to say here is that it takes the individual's assent. You have to actually give permission before they will make any adjustments to behavior. And a lot of the controversy that has erupted over ABA is that ABA practitioners were going in and just trying to forcefully change behavior, or were actively encouraging neurodivergent individuals to mask their behaviors for the benefit of the neuronormative world, which was a very ableist stance. I cannot accurately say that the old style of ABA has entirely disappeared. So it is very important that you vet the people that you're looking to work with before you actually take on these services. But for me, it was the only service that I was able to gain access to that actually came in and started being effective for me. So with that said, Balanced Speech and Behavior is Melisa Santacroce's company. She's the owner and proprietor of that particular service. And I was attracted to her because, as I stole this quote from her website, often individuals who have complex medical or psychiatric needs, a history of trauma, those who are adolescent or adult age, or people who engage in dangerous problem behavior are not adequately served by everyday ABA agencies. Balanced Speech and Behavior seeks to fill that gap. So Balanced Speech and Behavior, their foundational belief is that behavior is a product of one's environment. And so they work very much on the principle that if they make a change in the environment rather than in the individual directly, then that elicits a change in behavior. And so far, I have found personally that that's been very effective for me. They use two different types of methodology, skills-based treatment and the enhanced choice model. I'm not going to go over exactly what those are. I'm going to let you read them for yourself. So I'll give you a few seconds to read that. And of course, you can also use the link in the chat box to visit Melisa's website directly and get information on her research there. Meet my team, or at least a portion of it. I apologize that as this is my first widespread presentation of this material, and because we decided to run with it rather quickly, I did not have time to actually seek out and receive permission from all of my team members to get their headshot included in this image. So we've got Kiara is pictured, Ryan is pictured, and my mom, Nancy Douglas, is there as well. Let's get into a little bit of crafting your care circle. So I have a process that I go through called coverage mapping, and this involves splitting the different members of the team into three separate groups. So I have what I refer to as my A team, my B team, and my C team. And just as a rough example of what that could potentially look like, I have my A team are the people who help me most often. I just threw out a number there, so this may or may not work for you, but we're just saying that the people who help most often are there for me, available 15 hours or more a week, nearly every week. So I see them just about every day or just about every week. My B team helps out a modest amount, so they may be helping, just for example, 3 to 12 hours per week, once or twice a month. And then I have my C team that helps out in short bursts. So for example, maybe just 1 or 2 hours at a span, occasionally whenever I call on them, but not all the time. And it's also important that a separate level of designation within those teams is that there are going to be certain types of commitment that each individual is able to make. So I have different commitment types that I list, such as I have specialists who hold a narrow scope of expertise. And so as an example of that, you might consider my care coordinator. My care coordinator is a member of my medical team who primarily is there to make sure that I'm getting my needs met on all of my medical basis. So making sure that I not only have appointments scheduled that I can attend for various medical appointments, but also making sure that I actually am able to get to those appointments and meet them. So my care coordinator is not somebody that I would, for example, turn to if I needed to schedule a pickup of dry cleaning. But it is somebody that I could tune to, for example, if I realized that my tooth was hurting and I needed to see a dentist, and I could call her up and let her know that I need to get an appointment scheduled and I'm having trouble getting through to that office and actually getting that appointment scheduled. Or my brain fog is just so bad that I can't think, and now I've let 3 or 4 different appointments stack up that I haven't attended, and they all need to be rescheduled at once, and I'm feeling overwhelmed by it. And my care coordinator would then go, and she has the authority to act on my behalf, and she'd make those calls and make sure that I got scheduled. You also have hired hands who are limited either by budget or by a set number of hours per week. So an example of that is a PCA, or a personal care attendant. And that's someone that I have available to me who is a very broad spectrum assistant who can help out with a bunch of different needs. They have like household services. They can help me with meal planning and meal preparation, a bunch of different things. But they are limited to, in my case, my PCA is limited to only helping me out 15 hours per week. So once I've reached that limit, I'm done. I just don't have them available anymore. And so that's something that's important to keep in mind whenever I'm scheduling and coordinating all of this help that I'm receiving. I may also receive help from volunteers. A time or two, I've just placed a post on Facebook saying, hey, I need some help. And people would reply back to it and say, yeah, I'm available. What can I do for you? And so a volunteer is someone who helps out when asked, but generally speaking, needs to be asked somewhat infrequently. Otherwise, they get burnt out on helping and they aren't available to help anymore. You also have friends who may help regularly or on a regular basis. I actually have a couple of really close friends that are attending this presentation right now, and they're there when I need them. But the caveat with that is that they desire reciprocation. So a friend might help you move from one apartment to the other. But of course, the flip side of that is that they do desire some reciprocity. And so if they need to move some furniture, then they may ask you to do the same for them that they did for you. And then, of course, you have family members, which often does require some level of reciprocity. It's not always even. So family members may be willing to help when others don't, but the frequency with which they help you, and sometimes to the degree to which they're willing to help you, is going to depend on the bond that is shared between family members. So just as an example, if I was on a road trip and I was traveling through a state where my second cousin, once removed, happened to be living, I probably wouldn't ask them if I could stay over at their house while I'm on the road, because that individual is not someone that I am particularly close with. Whereas if it was my uncle or it was my first cousin, then I actually have a close enough relationship that I would feel comfortable saying, hey, could I crash on your couch for a night while I rest up to go back to driving? So again, with family, you have to consider how closely are you bonded. One of the things that actually really started me down the path of developing this scaffolding of support strategy is the fact that I do have family members that are willing to help me, but they're somewhat limited in the type of help that they can provide. In some areas, they're great. My mom or my stepdad, if I need a ride somewhere because my car broke down, then they're first in line to help me out with that. But the fact is that my mom does have a medical condition of her own, and it demands a lot of time and energy from her. And so I can't ask for the type of help that I might desire or need in certain situations. And so within that, just for example, my mom is not one of those home cooking moms. And so if I'm visiting over at their house, then I may know that it's expected that if I'm going to have a meal, I may be cooking that meal for myself. Part of that also has to do with having different dietary restrictions. So the type of help that you receive from family is going to depend largely on who you have available to you and what the relation to that individual you have. Let's talk a little bit about what mapping your coverage actually looks like. So I'm going to turn to a hypothetical example here. So over on the right, there's this big circle. You've got your patient-centered circle of care. And in the center of that circle is our guy, Tim. So Tim is the guy that I'm using for this example. And rather than giving him 45 areas of need like I identified for myself, we're going to limit him to just 8. So Tim has struggles. Over on the left here, you see that he struggles with his mobility. He struggles with meal prep. He struggles with housekeeping, toileting, med reminders, hygiene, companionship, and transportation. And in the middle column, you have his care team. He's got an A team and a B team. And his A team is, if you add this up, we've got 6 areas of need that are covered under the A team and an additional 6 areas of need that are covered by the B team. But when we map it out into this circular pattern here, we start to see that there is one really big gap in specifically the area of housekeeping. So that's an area that Tim is going to continue to struggle with. And it's an area where he's going to really have to focus on either increasing the team members that he has, or maybe changing some of the duties that he assigns to those team members, or requests that he makes to the individuals who are volunteering to help him out, so that he can get that coverage. So I went through a process called zone mapping. This is something that I once again drew from the Zosia Zach's book that I mentioned, Life and Love. And this is another way of organizing the way that stuff gets done around your home. So you want to start out with a map of your living space. And in that living space, you can either identify where things are and then just draw it by hand, or if you live in a rental property, you might be able to go to the rental office and just ask them for a floor plan of the unit that you're renting. Oftentimes they'll have that. Or if you are technologically inclined, you may choose to use some architectural software. I know there are some good free ones that'll help you. Basically, they're designed for floor planning design, but you can use it to generate a floor plan of the current living space that you have. And once you have that, you want to declare the different zones. Now, as pointed out in chat, this is a fancy one where everything is color-coded, so it's easy to see. And that is certainly something that you can do. But the main thing is that you want to use labels for each of the zones that make sense to you. At minimum, you're going to have at least a kitchen zone, a bathroom zone, and a bedroom zone. Consider adding other zones that suit your lifestyle. So for example, in this zone map, we have a TV watching or a video game playing zone that's right here in front of the couch. And again, this is going to be adapted to whatever the specific space that you have is going to be. And yes, somebody in the chat mentioned doom boxes, and that is essentially what you're doing is you're creating an analog for the doom box, but just in different areas of your house. And hopefully they don't become doom boxes because they are easier to manage. A doom box is basically a box where you collect things. And so the reason why it's referred to as a doom box is to your impending doom, you're always going to have some stuff in that box. And a lot of times it's where that stuff goes to kind of die and collect. And then before long, you've got dozens and dozens of doom boxes just cluttering up your apartment or your living space. Yes, it is like a junk drawer, but it, generally speaking, tends to be larger than a junk drawer, and it's not confined to just a kitchen or a storage space. So the idea is that rather than stumbling along your junk that's just strewn all over the floor, or keeping it in a collection box to sort through later, what you do is you make the zone map and you use labels to determine what each of those zones is for. And then you declare rules about what belongs in each zone. So just for example, I may decide that cups and bowls belong in the kitchen zone. And if I don't have the energy to actually wash all the dishes for the day, then what I will do is I will just make sure that I at least get all of my cups and bowls back into the kitchen today. And then you also make rules about what must stay out of each zone. So you might have a bedroom zone and say that no cups or bowls go into the bedroom ever. And you declare that that is a rule for your home, whatever works for you. And so, for example, I don't like having any food anywhere near my mattress because I know that if I let it into my bedroom space, then it's going to end up with crumbs in my bed. So it's just a rule that I don't eat in my bedroom. And then, of course, there may be certain exceptions. So if you allow any exceptions, it may be, for example, I can have a cup of water by my bedside table on my nightstand. And that is my one exception that I will allow in the bedroom. So that's a little bit about how that works. Now moving on to a different type of visual priority, easy charts. Again, this comes from the Zojazak's book, but with the easy charts, you start by listing everything that needs doing. Now, you may have already done the work if there's overlap between your needs assessment and your easy charting. In my case, just about everything that I was struggling with could easily convert into my easy chart. Once you have a list of everything that needs doing, then you move to dividing those tasks by frequency. This kind of gets back to that big, loud picture of the Excel spreadsheet that was super colorful. You don't have to go to quite that detailed of an extent, but the point is that you want to at least determine what are those items that need to be done daily, what are those items that need to be done weekly, and what needs to be done monthly, etc. And then you create your chart. You can draw, print, or buy a pre-made chart. The one that you see pictured here was actually one that I purchased on Amazon, so you can find those pretty easily. And it's magnetized so that it sticks to the refrigerator, which was pretty convenient. Once you have your chart, you want to make sure that you mark with text, or some people like using icon reminders. So you can draw little pictures to remind you of what needs doing. And then you can start to organize it and mark down whenever you actually get something done. With your weekly chart, you want to make sure that you assign only one or two of the most critical tasks for each slot. And you want to make sure that you give yourself at least one AM as well as one PM slot off each week, so that you're not overwhelming yourself with always being busy all of the time. In your monthly chart, you want to make sure that you assign a specific date to when tasks get accomplished. So for example, the 14th. And it doesn't matter what month it is. If I assign a task to the 14th, I know if it's the 14th, then I need to do this specific thing on that day. And that makes it easier to remember from month to month what's going on, rather than having that day float around like having it always be the last Thursday of the month. Now, I will give the caveat that my specific chart is rather complex. And if you actually look closely, you'll see that it's 3 charts in one, that I have 3 separate areas. And I also have different team members that are assigned to helping with that. So the main thing with this is just to stay open to revision, because task priorities may shift over time, and the same chart may not be useful on week 1 as is useful on week 27. What you're seeing pictured here is the evolution of my chart. It went through several different stages of refinement before we settled on this as being the most functional. So don't feel discouraged if you start a chart out and you decide that its format is just not working for you. It's a good time to mark it down in dry erase, or if it suits you, draw it out on paper and just start again from the drawing board and find a different format or find a different set of activities. The main thing is that you want to make it easy, hence the name, easy chart, easy enough to use on a daily basis, so that you're at least getting something done rather than nothing. And to that end, part 3, I want to talk a little bit about a digital software utility that I started using called Milanote. Now, this is not the only option available. There are actually several different types of programs that work similar to this, but Milanote was designed as a digital whiteboarding tool for planning creative projects. It's essentially a virtual whiteboard, and it just has the advantage that when you plot something out on the digital whiteboard, you can easily just shuffle things around, or you can just hit the delete button and start again from scratch. And you can really work in a fluid environment that lets you play around with your lists and charts and how they're arranged until you find something that works for you. So this might be something that you actually do in the beginning when you are first figuring out what your chart should look like or how it should work. So it could be involved in the planning stages. But it is also something that I found particularly useful with my team is we started out with the whiteboard chart on the refrigerator that you saw, and then we converted that into a digital space afterwards. And that just made it faster and more streamlined once we had adapted it into a series of checklists and digital reproductions of our easy charts. It made it so much faster and easier to reset at the beginning of each new week. And it created a digital workspace where we could have a digital record of everything that's been going on from week to week. So it wasn't just gone whenever we deleted it. It actually could be archived instead. So in my specific instance, we started out with our team planner. So we've got kind of a digital central hub where each team member has assigned tasks. We have what's called the master task list, which is basically a digital version of those 45 needs that I showed you, of just showing everything and anything that needs doing. We have the weekly task log, which shows what we're actually accomplishing from week to week. And we have project-specific task boards, such as if we have a special project, then we create a new task board within the Milanote program. And Milanote, what's really nice about it is it just gives you infinite boards that you can create, and you can have boards within boards. So rather than just having one whiteboard, you now suddenly have an infinite expanse of different places where you can store information. And that digital workspace is really useful for our team. Let's talk a little bit about stabilizing resources. And this is going to be the most subjective item on the list because it's going to have the most to do with your specific circumstance. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to tell you how to stabilize what resources you have available to you. But I'm just going to go over a few of the different areas that you might potentially have a need to stabilize. So there's time management. You'll consider things like your routine, your self-care, your easy charting, and how you're organizing all of the tasks that need doing, etc. You may have money or finances that you're looking to stabilize, which includes income, spending, financial planning. You may have personnel that you're looking to stabilize, such as medical staff, the makeup and shape of your CareCircle, or various social services that you may be connected to. I know right now, one of the reasons why I didn't talk a whole lot about my personal care attendant is because I am in the process of hiring a new personal care attendant. You want to consider your social supports, which would be like your friend group, any volunteering projects that you might be involved in. So rather than talking about volunteers for your CareCircle, this would be more like volunteer work that you could be potentially involved in doing, religious organizations that you are involved in, or peer groups, etc. And then you have your natural supports, which include your spouse or significant other, your family by blood, or your family by choice. If you have anybody who's close enough to you that you would consider family, then I would lump those in with your natural supports. I'm going to single out specifically talking about financial stability here for a moment and discuss a little bit of how I was able to leverage an ABLE account for financial stability. Now, I happen to live in New Mexico. I know some people are tuning in from other areas of the US. So it is important to know that even though I have the ABLE New Mexico logo up in the corner, that other states do offer their own versions of this program. And so it's worth checking out what's available to you in your area. Also, you're not restricted to having an ABLE account that is through the specific state where you reside. There are some states that have residency requirements. New Mexico is one of them, but not all. So regardless of where you live in the 50 states, there is going to be at least one ABLE account that is available to you. What does ABLE stand for? It's the Achieving a Better Life Experience account. ABLE accounts allow individuals with disabilities to save and invest money without losing eligibility for certain public benefits programs like Medicaid or SSI. Earnings in your ABLE account are not subject to federal income taxes. So as long as you spend them on quote unquote qualified disability expenses such as food, clothing, personal care items, and other basic living expenses. Now, what is a qualified disability expense? There's actually a pretty long list of it. So check the chat for a link that will talk more specifically about what those qualified expenses are. You can also receive contributions into your ABLE account, and that can be accepted through a provided web portal so that friends, family, or anyone who wishes to invest in your future can do so safely and securely. It's basically like a state-funded program that offers you a tax-free GoFundMe campaign. So you basically get a link that you'll actually see an example of one a little later in the presentation, but you get a link to a web page that is a portal through which people can actually make contributions into your account. And it's basically like having a GoFundMe for yourself, where just anybody and everybody can contribute to ensuring that you have a better future. Is an ABLE account right for you? Well, to qualify for an ABLE account, you must have developed a disability before age 26 and have lived with your disability for at least 1 year. You must be entitled to SSI or SSDI because of your disability, or have a condition listed on the Social Security Administration's list of compassionate allowances conditions, or be able to self-certify your disability and diagnosis. And once again, what does it mean to self-certify? It's listed on the website, so look to those links. Additionally, you might benefit from an ABLE account if you have at least $25 to open the account, and you expect at least $5 a month in contributions from either earned or unearned income sources to overtake the quarterly fees to maintain the account. Or if you're in danger of losing benefits due to holding $2,000 or more in a checking or savings account. So if you happen to be on SSI disability or a related program, then you actually have this limitation where they do not allow you to hold more than $2,000 in assets at any given time. Otherwise, it actually reduces the amount of benefits that you receive. This is a workaround for that, because basically any money that you have in an ABLE account is just not counted as any kind of income or asset, which is one of the main advantages. So if you do happen to have a considerable savings and you are on either SSI, SSDI, HUD housing, SNAP, or any government-funded benefits program, then you should definitely consider the benefits of an ABLE account. The other circumstances, if you expect to receive a large contribution from family or any single source up to the limit of $16,000 in any single year. So this is a true story. I actually had a family member who was attempting to pay out an early inheritance and cut me a check. And I actually refused to cash that check, because if I had done so and just put it in a regular checking or savings account, then it would have increased my rent because I'm on income-based housing. So I actually said, no, I'm sorry, I can't accept your generosity the first time that came around. Once I discovered that I could set up an ABLE account and it would allow me to actually receive that money into it, then I was able to accept that generosity from my family member without undue repercussions. The other circumstances, if you wish to invest money in mutual funds without having assets held count against your benefits. So basically, another rule that they have if you're on assistance is that you cannot be receiving earnings from having money on the stock market or otherwise investing in something that's paying out dividends. Otherwise, that income that you receive counts against your benefit limit. So that's important information to know regarding setting up an ABLE account, whether it's right for you. Now, if you do decide that it's right for you, here's how to open an ABLE account. First, you want to choose which state's ABLE program you wish to apply for. So there's a cross-comparative list available that shows every state that's participating in the ABLE account program, and that link will be available in the chat shortly. And I would recommend that you read that article and that you look at that list because it will tell you whether those accounts are available for your state, whether there are any residency requirements and so forth, as well as the specific terms and compare the terms, such as the quarterly fees that I mentioned. So after you choose one specific state to go through, you can apply through your chosen state's web portal. And as I mentioned before, you don't have to choose a state in which you reside. Just make sure you're paying attention to those residency rules. Choose the account whose benefits makes the most sense to you or your situation. The application itself is simple and straightforward, and you don't have to submit proof of disability or proof of income upon opening the account. However, you are required to hold proof in the event of an audit or an investigation. So make sure that you've done your due diligence beforehand. So in summary, for the research summary, expect the unexpected, be prepared, solve smaller problems until the bigger ones can be met, practice coping ahead, use a sensory emergency kit, seek long-term supports that are comprehensive and robust, automate tasks using technology, put a team together, delegate those tasks and help to coordinate efforts, and then stabilize your resources. So what's next? Well, I have a pretty comprehensive plan for my product rollout development chain. And so this fancy chart that you're seeing here shows that. But the main thing to direct your attention toward is this red triangle that says you are here. You're participating right now in my 90-minute didactic from which all of this begins. The next step in the chain is going to be developing Solve for Yes into a 12-part self-guided deep dive where I will be describing the how-to behind each of these things that I'm kind of glossing over in this presentation. So there'll be 12 parts to it, and you'll be able to go at your own pace in actually developing each of those steps. There's a lot of lateral movement that can happen within this Solve for Yes program. I have a desire to actually start a YouTube channel where I can do periodic videos on going into specific things like, I'd really like to do an unboxing video of my SEm-Kit and show you guys what's inside of it, and talk a little bit about why I chose the specific items for it that I did. I also have had some requests for podcasts, but there are a bunch of different opportunities that I have that will help to just disseminate or get the information out that are contained in the Solve for Yes program. And then I have a couple of products that I'm working on developing that are going to be future steps for this process. But here's how you can help right now. So the main thing is that I won't be able to get to any of these next steps until I am able to actually put a team together to actually launch all of these things like the YouTube channel or the podcast. What would really help today is if you could make any kind of small contribution to help. So appearing in the chat shortly is going to be a link where you can actually go right now, if you haven't already, and at very least, just scope out what it looks like when you have an ABLE account. This will actually link you to my personal ABLE account. And you can see what it looks like when you go in to actually make a contribution. If you have the ability to, a suggested contribution of $15 to $25 will go first toward my personal living expenses for the year, and second toward future presentations and expanded content, up to $7,500 for each of those. Now, I certainly do not expect or demand that anybody who's watching this has the ability to contribute, but any contribution would be definitely appreciated. Just show me with your dollar amount how much you value this information, and I hope that if it's been valuable at all to you, that you'll show it to yourself by implementing some of what we talked about today. The second thing that you can do is you can join our launch team. So drop us an email to the email that's listed there, creativeinterestllc@outlook.com, with the subject launch team if you're interested in being part of the initial team that's going to bring some of these next steps to light. If you're an experienced YouTube content creator and or a social media influencer, then it is absolutely essential that you reach out to us because we've got questions about how to do it and what needs to be done, and we'd love to incorporate you as part of your team. And of course, we need to know a little bit about what needs to happen so that we can take this information out to the masses and get it freely available for everyone to use. So in the spirit of that, the biggest thing that you can do, if nothing else tonight, is just help to spread the word. Share the replay after that comes out, or tell a friend that you attended this tonight and that you got something out of this presentation. I'm going to blast through the back half of this. So there are some next steps that are listed here. I'm going to let you read them. I'm not going to read them out loud, but the main thing is that we've already accomplished the first step, and then there's the next step, which is bringing this didactic back to the New Mexico LEND constituents. And I will actually be delivering this back to the new cohort of fellows in one of the future years of the LEND program. But there are a number of other next steps that come ahead of that, which I'll give you a few seconds to just glance over. Okay, moving on to products. Now, it is important to understand that these products are all in development. None of them are ready for market just yet. So I put the coming soon tag on there to let you know that none of what you're about to see is actually available for purchase just yet. But I've got 3 different types of products that I have planned. One is a physical product, one is a software product, and I've got a bunch of different variations on info products that will be shortly becoming available. So now we get to go back to the SEm-Kits, and I want to talk a little bit about what a SEm-Kit is and what goes into one. And it will actually be something that I plan to do in the future. We talked about the YouTube unboxing video. I want to show people not only what's in my kit, but how they can put together their own SEm-Kit from scratch. I'm also aware that some people, for whatever reason, would prefer to have a prepackaged SEm-Kit that's available, that they just click a few buttons on a website and say what they'd like to have in it, and it gets sent to them in the mail. I am not currently set up to offer SEm-Kits to people, but I would eventually like to have a website that people could go to where they could order them for themselves. So a SEm-Kit holds tools to help you explore the world. Fill it with items that make the world a more comfortable place for you to be in. I've identified 3 types of aids that go into a SEm-Kit. So we have, first of all, sensory limiting devices. And this is perhaps one of the most important things to make sure that you include, because if you can stop those sensory irritations from reaching you, then you're going to have less stress in your stress bucket, and it's going to be less likely that it's going to fill up in the first place. So sensory limiting devices reduce the amount of sensory input that you receive. And that includes things like sunglasses. I've got my sunglasses right here. Sometimes I wear my sunglasses indoors just because lights are bright enough that they bother me. I also have a filtration mask or a pollution mask that I wear all the time. A lot of people think that I am just wearing a COVID mask, that I just refuse to admit that the pandemic is finally calming down. But in actuality, I walk around outside with the filtration mask because I happen to have a multiple chemical sensitivity, which means things like vehicle exhaust and perfume and cologne, things like that I'm exposed to throughout the day can cause me an asthma attack. And so that helps to limit the exposure, so that if I am exposed to it, it helps to reduce some of what I'm taking in. You can also get earplugs or noise dampeners. There is definitely one brand that I'm looking at checking out is called Loop. There are a couple of competing brands, but they're basically like earplugs with holes in them that help to lessen the impact of sound, but still allow you to hear through them. And those are really useful. for helping to dampen the sound, I've been told. So then you have practical interventions, which help to distract or redirect focus away from whatever sensory exposure is bothering you. And so you can use something like a fidget spinner or another sort of fidget device. You can use a sound machine. I have actually got my headset on right now that I'm talking to you through. But sometimes I will listen to a sound machine at a low volume so that I can still hear conversations around me, but it just helps to kind of calm me down and distract me from all the commotion in the room. Some people prefer to listen to music or have noise canceling headphones that actually protect them from sound. But of course, the downside to that is that you can't actually listen in to a conversation or easily talk to someone while you're protected. It can still be useful to carry around, though, for those specific instances when you just could really benefit from that extra protection. And I also list a protein snack because, as I mentioned before, I get my hunger reflex gets super loud at times, and sometimes I need to quickly calm it down by getting a spike in blood sugar, so that I can focus on the conversation at hand or a task that I'm performing. And then you have functional supports, which aid recovery following an exposure. So this kind of damage control after you've been exposed. I actually list in this category a first aid kit because sometimes you might have actual physical emergency arise, and it's useful to have the ability to react to a situation that involves some level of danger or injury. But this one for me actually has a dual purpose because I also find that having a first aid kit packaged in with my SEm-Kit, it just helps me relax into the knowledge that if something unexpected were to arise, I have the tools at my disposal to help take care of the issue. So this is one of those dual items that can be a little bit preventative as well as be something that you can use to react after you've been exposed. Other examples of functional supports are comfort items. So you might have something that you stem on. As we mentioned before, stemming is a term for sensory stimulation of a positive quality. So you might have something like a soft cloth. I've got a little soft cloth right here. Or a very small stuffed animal that you can stroke to help you calm yourself down after you've been exposed. Another useful tool that would be considered a functional support is conversation cards. Or I actually have an app on my smartphone that basically works the same way. It's a text-to-speech app where if I do encounter that intermittent aphasia and I lose my ability to speak, then I can go on my smartphone and I can tap buttons and it will actually do the talking for me. And so that can help release sort of the pressure of you needing to speak after you've been exposed to sensory exposure. Next, we're going to talk about something that I have envisioned that is not here yet. I wish it was, but I have this idea for a software-driven platform that would drive the scaffolding of supports called CareCircle S-O-S. CareCircle S-O-S will be person-centered as well as community-based, and it will provide scheduling, task delegation, process workflow, logistics management, and coverage mapping. I've basically envisioned this kind of like the way that Uber works for ride sharing, except this would be for all of the different things that we went over in the scaffolding of supports. So if I needed help, let's say getting the dishes done one day because I just couldn't bring myself to do it, I would really like an app that I would be able to make a call out to my network and there'd be a bunch of different people in my CareCircle, and they would pick up that notification. And so whoever's closest or whoever's most willing could actually respond to that notification bell, and they could actually give me communication that says, okay, I can help you with that. I'll be over in a little while. It would take a lot of infrastructure to make this happen, and I have some really robust features planned. So for now, we just have to imagine a mobile app that literally brings respite care to your door. And I have a bunch of different features mapped out. So I actually have a sales pitch that I'm working on for pitching this concept to software developers that already have caregiving apps that they have already developed. Or in some cases, I'm looking at business management apps for things like project management in the business world. I think that those could easily be adapted to work on this platform. And it would basically, for the software developer, would be a bit of a reface and rebrand, but it wouldn't have to be a complete overhaul or be built entirely from scratch. So in the future, I will be making a pitch to different software development companies on trying to bring this app into reality. For now, it just remains a pipe dream. What I can offer now is info products, and that's the fastest and the easiest thing that I can roll out. So it starts, this is my info product tree of opportunity. And it starts down at the roots with the UNM CDD and bringing this didactic back to the UNM constituents that it was first developed for. But of course, I've already mentioned that I want to bring this into YouTube and the public speaking arena. And it just branches out from there in a dozen different ways, creating opportunities for different ways that we can get the information across and get it out there to the masses. We can basically gloss over the next portion. Dissemination plan was something that I included for my LIND program. I'm not going to bother reading through every bullet point here, but just an overview. I plan to present this didactic to known and prospective stakeholders back to LEND. I plan to rewrite the didactic to fit the TED Talk format because one of my grand visions is that I want to actually deliver a talk from the red circle and do my own TED Talk. I will be expanding the topical material into the Solve for Yes self-guided training course. I will be promoting the material through guest appearances on YouTube, podcasts, etc. I already had some invitations to appear in other people's podcasts. I have yet to have the resources set up to start a podcast of my own. I plan to partner with an online vendor to provide SEm-Kit order fulfillment so that you can actually go and buy a SEm-Kit rather than have to construct one for yourself. And I plan to pitch to development companies to rebrand or repurpose existing software architecture into the CareCircle S-O-S platform. And so that marks the end of the main presentation. And now I will open it out to the floor for any questions that you might have. Okay, let's answer some of the questions from the chat first, and then I'll invite people that are with us to unmute themselves and ask questions once we've fulfilled the few that were in the chat.
Great, yeah. So regarding Milanote and your kind of to-do list system, how long did it take to develop this and for it to flow?
I would say that specifically, well, from start to finish, it was probably about 6 months. That was starting first with the easy charting and then moving forward into adapting that into the digital platform. We actually didn't discover Milanote until after we had already had the easy charting in place. So it probably could have been developed a little faster if we had Milanote right from the get-go. But I would say it was about 6 months from start to finish.
Awesome. And then another one about care coordinators. Are they really helpful? I always kind of figured the only person who could do those tasks was me.
Well, care coordinators, really vary. They vary quite a bit from person to person. It can be somewhat dependent on who your insurance provider is. So, for example, I use Blue Cross Blue Shield Centennial Care, and I just happened to luck out that I got an outstanding care coordinator through that. We used to have a different insurance company called Molina in the state of New Mexico, and my experience with them was absolutely abysmal. They basically completely ignored me. Now, I'm not saying that that was necessarily that company's issue. It may have been the specific person that I was assigned. I don't know. But I do know that it wasn't until Molina left the state and basically dumped off all of its caseload onto the various other providers. And it was just a random draw of the hat that I got Blue Cross Blue Shield. But when I switched providers and I did get a new care coordinator, I managed to just latch on to somebody awesome. Now, I will say as a caveat that the fact that I have two care coordinators, one for physical health and one for behavioral health, I had to specifically ask for that. They just originally assigned me a physical health care coordinator. And then it wasn't until I basically had a breakdown over the phone that they were kind of like, whoa, it sounds like you're really struggling, buddy. And then I asked if there was any way that they could get me anywhere closer to true case management. And that's when they finally assigned me the behavioral health care coordinator, who is really the awesome, outstanding person. And she now is my go-to person who picks up a lot of the slack. I hardly ever hear from my physical health care coordinator. And every time I do hear from her, it's usually because it's coming through the other person. So sometimes you just get somebody who's just an absolute rock star. And unfortunately, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's just the way that our service availability works here in the state of New Mexico. It's a real grab bag assortment.
And to follow up on that, Kira is wondering if they have someone who does both together.
I asked that specifically because one of the things that I was asking about was, the fact that because my condition is neurological in nature, it is thereby a requirement that I have some sort of holistic approach, because it's not entirely, mental health and it's not entirely physical health. They really tightly tie into each other. The official answer that I got was no. Our system is not currently set up so that you can have one person that does both. But in reality, like I said, because my behavioral health care coordinator took the initiative and basically spearheaded the effort, she effectively has become the person who handles everything. And then, like I said, if my physical health care coordinator needs to be involved, then my behavioral health one kind of defers down to the physical health person in situations where that's needed. So the answer is kind of a soft, fuzzy yes. It just depends on who you get and whether they're willing to actually just sort of pick up the slack for other people.
Awesome. And I hope you have a chance to look through the chat, Jeremy, or I can send you a copy of it. You've gotten lots of love, lots of really great conversation throughout this. So thank you everyone for being involved. We had a really great question regarding zone mapping, about how would you manage this with an unwilling-ish partner, or how would you explain this to your home mates or partners?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Well, so I basically was not successful at setting up zone mapping while I was living with roommates or other people. So I may not be the best qualified to answer that question. But just taking a stab at it, One of the things that I would do because of the situation that I'm in is I would take it up with my medical team. And primarily, I think that I would talk to Melisa, who is kind of the head of the team, or I would talk to Kiara here, who is actually the main coordinator between different team members. And I would say, okay, I've got this issue where I want to do the zone mapping thing, but my partner or my roommates just won't go for it. Can you help me with figuring out how to talk to them about it? Or could we maybe do a joint session where you could basically, hold an intervention where you can kind of communicate like this is something that this individual really needs and would benefit from. And even if we have to adapt to the process in some way so that it doesn't completely derail the family lifestyle or the household lifestyle, then we can still try to work something up that's going to benefit this individual.
Yes, and
Kiara can back me up that she would definitely help me out in that way.
yes, and I would Melissa mentioned that it's a good idea to have some support communicating about these challenging conversations. And I would second that by saying it's definitely underrated to have a support person or kind of a mediator for conversations like this. I would love to normalize that more.
Absolutely, mediation is definitely underrated. But if you do have a question for me right now, feel free to just unmute yourself and turn your video on so that the group can see you and ask. Or showing your video is optional for those who may not be comfortable with it.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and thoughts in the chat. It was really awesome to kind of like read through them as we went. Thank you for being here. The question that Asimos, apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly, or the statement that they just wrote, reminded me of a question that came up earlier. That is, what if the autistic person doesn't accept they have a disability and is more hesitant to accept the supports like a SEm-Kit? And we had a response to that, the suggestion to say it like a stress kit, like relabel it, reframe that. But
we have a question?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions were mine. I do not have autism, but I work with your mom, and through education, I like quickly realized that my dad had like undiagnosed autism, and so he's like 70 years old. And there was like a lot of stigma, which is, I believe there can still be a lot of stigma about having one, and it's like even overwhelming to be like, hey dad, like what if like your brain is different? And took him like, he like read an article by a Miss America who had discovered she had autism, and then like he came around, and like it takes so much for him to process of like, oh, like the world isn't broken, or like to understand like when he needs help and support. And watching your presentation, I was just like so amazed at like your understanding of like your disability and willingness to accept supports. And it's like we've had to like cover some supports in peanut butter and like try and like support my dad, because for me, like it looks very painful sometimes and really stressful and really upsetting. And then sometimes helping is like overstimulating.
Right.
So yeah, like that was like so many of my questions as a person on another person's A team sometimes, and like as a person's child, I think it could really like mess with his mindset. And so like I know that you're a father and like you found these tools and things like that. And I've seen that growth for my dad. And so I keep wanting to support him. But like how like what is it like to like kind of come to terms with that? Like willing to accept help.
Yeah, that's honestly because of the path that I followed. It's a little difficult for me to answer because I wasn't diagnosed with autism until age 31. I didn't actually get my full ASD diagnosis until this April. And so rather than have the diagnosis of autism hanging over me for most of my life, I just had this question mark of what is wrong with me? And I knew that there was something that made me different, but I didn't know what it was. So for me, that turned into this sort of passionate quest of trying to discover what it is that is causing these symptoms to be present in my life. And I guess the level of acceptance just came with the amount of time that it took for me to get those answers, because I had already gone through my entire childhood and a good portion of my adulthood before I even had the opportunity to finally get an answer of this is what to call it. This is how we're going to label it from now on. I wonder if I could kick the question over to my team members, if Kiara or if Melissa is still in the audience, one of them could speak on how they might possibly approach it if they were working with a client who was reluctant to accept supports or even accept their diagnosis. Does somebody from my team want to speak on that?
I can if you want, Jeremy. I don't know. I think the first piece of this is, each individual, each human, regardless of neurotype, needs to have some level of self-love in order to be accepting. And so I'm curious if you have someone that is not accepting of a disability, if there's more of an underlying kind of not acceptance of themselves in a way. And that could be kind of a mental health thing too, and something that could be supported by a mental health care worker in trying to work through that and learning some self-compassion strategies, some mindful self-compassion. And those aren't only for people with autism, right? We all need those strategies. But I wonder, when you're talking about that with your father, if something along those lines, just in general, might kind of help increase his awareness and acceptance of many things about himself, including that piece of it and the complexity that he has. Just some thoughts.
Thank you very much for that, Melissa.
I guess another thought too, now this may not be as useful for someone your father's age, but I do find that there are some really vibrant autistic communities that you can find online in particular. And there is something about having interactions and relationships with people where you can really feel like you can be yourself. And I think that can help you in any group of people. When you're around people that communicate similar to you, you're going to appreciate that and you're going to be yourself more. And that's going to lead hopefully to more self-acceptance as well. And I wonder if your father, if he knows anybody else, that has autism. And I often try to gently bring that up with the people that I work with as well, and their family members, that, there's a huge culture and vibrant community out there to join and be part of, and different aspects of it, different groups. And with the internet, you can find these types of things too, and maybe finding some events or ways to connect with other neurodivergent individuals might be also a starting point as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that Facebook groups and things, like I noticed that he likes engaging in the YouTube comments of medieval armor and just all these odd things he'll tell me about, like going down a rabbit hole down YouTube comments and interacting with people. The talk therapy, I know that he mentioned it. Like my dad has like really like tried to set up his mind of like talking to somebody he doesn't know. And I think like for that, like it's like it falls on us as his kids who he like really trusts. And I think that's like he's covered. I've heard a lot of things about masking his behaviors. And it wasn't until like later he's like, well, I thought it was okay to come home and like fall apart because I trust you guys and I felt safe. But it was like, it was really scary growing up and not understanding what was happening. Like, why was my dad crying over a pen that's not writing? And like, yeah, again, it's like he's in pain, you know, and so he's still coming to terms of like, well, we don't judge, his sister doesn't judge, and like trying to doctors, I think, and he's a doctor, he's like a dentist. And so he's like, he just is so afraid of, I don't know, I guess it's fear of somebody understanding, and he has like just layers of masking. So yeah, I think like it's really helpful to hear about like how much people have like experienced that masking and that there are communities and stuff for him. So yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking also about, you know, sometimes people with a variety of different ways of interacting with the world have one or two people in their, usually in their family, or someone that they really feel like they can be themselves with and be comfortable with. And it might be family members in your case as well. And, you know, it might be powerful to offer to attend an appointment with him if he, you know, you can say no. But I think sometimes, you know, offering that kind of support and being okay with the fact that they could say no, and that's not a rejection of you, and just keep offering. And, you know, that could be beneficial too, because sometimes I find myself as being sort of like the conduit between like the person with the communication difference and this person that they need to communicate with. And there's a lot of reasons for that I think that could be really helpful. And some of it has to do with some emotional regulation stuff and some emotional safety that the person may feel when they have like a close person that truly understands them present at those things. It can just be more regulating. And then that person can maybe speak up and fill in the blanks sometimes when that person is freezing and fight or flight and all of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that might be another idea too, of trying to, I don't think everybody needs to go to every appointment by themselves, and you can have someone with you, you can have support members of your team, whoever that is. And even having that person there sometimes can help that person initiate the start of the appointment, which sometimes is the hardest part with anxiety and that type of thing too.
And as an individual on the spectrum, I can say that having a support person who's willing to offer themselves to help out in any situation where I'm going to be exposed to sensory stimulations, or I'm going to be outside of my element and subjected to stressful stimuli, it just makes a huge difference. And it's not necessarily that I need that person there to help me actually navigate the appointment, but just having them there as support, knowing that, you know, they're kind of like my backdrop behind me. It helps give me the courage and confidence to get through it on my own.
I also think that there's something to be said for finding even just like resources, and maybe something you can do as a family member is like kind of drop articles or blog posts that might be helpful in kind of like a non-intrusive manner. I'll actually drop one right now since we're talking about masking, and this actually talks about it specifically for ADHD. And this blog has a lot of really valuable research links as well to kind of like discuss some of these neurological differences that we see with neurodivergent brains.
Awesome. Did we cover everybody's questions then?
I think we got to
Cool.
most of them from the chat. Like I said, there's a couple others, but they're pretty thoroughly answered. So for the sake of time efficiency, I figure
Great.
we're probably good.
I think it's probably a good time to call it then. Well, thank you everyone for your time. I know we've gone a little over, so I want to make sure that you guys have time to prepare for your next engagements.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was great.
Great.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.